Hi, everyone.
Woo!
Hello.
What up, Nomadic Network peeps?
Admit all.
Welcome, welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here.
Hi, Eves.
We're just going to wait a minute for everyone to jump in and figure out Zoom. But in the meantime, in the chat, you can drop where you're from, or if you've ever worked remotely and traveled for any amount of time, like tell us all about your experiences, or if that's something you're working towards right now, let us know.
Hi, hi from Long Island. Hi, Long Island.
Strong Island in the house. I love it. Bay Area.
Oh, yay area.
Where's Jersey at?
The greatest state in all the states. Controversial opinion.
Cool, working towards working remotely.
Toronto, Missouri.
Very cool.
Look at all these people. Hi, everyone.
A lot of Texas in here. Nice.
Nuanu, what up?
Hey, you have some more Hawaii folks in here.
Hi, everyone. Texas, San Diego.
How exciting.
Ooh, LA.
LA, yeah. A lot of people here. Very cool. Awesome. We can get started as everyone. We'll just keep admitting people in. So hello again, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Nomadic Network. And if any of you are new here, we especially welcome you. We're excited to have all of you returning folks back. My name is Leah. You can find me as LA in Flight on all of your social media networks. And I am an event manager by trade and a podcast host as well. So all that information is in my little name there. So say hello. And today we're hosting Carmela and Raymond. They're going to teach us how they've worked and lived abroad. But before that, just a few announcements. So if those of you that are new to Nomadic Network, we are a global network connecting travel enthusiasts from all over the world. And right now, since not many places are hosting big events, we've moved everything online. But that doesn't mean we'll skimp on any of the quality, because you can go see our roster at nomadicnetwork.com/events, and you'll see that you really won't want to miss any of them. So a few housekeeping rules to keep in mind. We're going to keep all of you on mute for now and drop any questions, any comments that you have in the chat. And we're going to have a Q&A after Carmela and Raymond's presentation. So we'll hope you will stick around for that. And with that being said, I can give you guys the floor, Carmela and Raymond. Do a little introduction for yourselves.
Okay.
Hi.
Well, we're gonna go right into our screen share because
Okay.
I love me a good PowerPoint. Technology. 1 second. Hi, everyone. Share screen. All right, we're gonna be real cute for a minute, so just check this out.
So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Especially thank you to Leah for moderating, and of course Erica at Nomadic Network for putting this all together. My name's Raymond. This is my wife Carmela. Together we have a blog called No Wrong Turns, and today we're going to talk to you about travel, remote working, and location independence. So let's get this party started. Where it all began. Should we close this one? Let's see. So where it all began. Carmela and I are both second generation Filipinos. Our parents were born in the Philippines and immigrated to the States, and they have huge families. We both have massive families. And despite only living about a 30-minute drive from each other, we actually met for the first time in Hawaii in 2005. Surprise, surprise. We are here now. So, fun fact, both of our parents actually went to the same high school together in the Philippines. And one of their classmates immigrated to Hawaii and was hosting a high school reunion. And we basically decided to come with our parents in order to have a nice little free vacation trip in Hawaii. Why not? And 5 years later, we ended up getting engaged at Newark Airport. And then shortly after, had a destination wedding in Mexico, which incidentally had 150 guests, which was pretty awesome.
And small considering how big our families are.
Yeah. So travel seemed to be a huge part of our story right from the very beginning and has continued to be a common thread throughout. So for our honeymoon, we decided what better way to sort of celebrate this than to have a nice epic adventure. So Carmela and I both sat down with Post-it notes and wrote down our bucket list destinations and realized that when we put them together, we can actually connect the dots and do around the world honeymoon. In total, it ended up being about a 3.5-month trip, and we hit about 11 countries. So we started in Rio for Carnival and headed due west until we reluctantly returned back to our office lives and wondered, how can we travel full time and do it better? Because quite frankly, this trip was not cheap. Let's see. So now here we are, 8 years since that first epic trip, and we are currently location independent and loving our lives. I mean, this is particularly our dream, and it's not for everyone, but this is the dream that we've sort of shaped and made it for ourselves.
So now here's the question, right? The question of the moment, which is how can you work remotely too? And you know, we joked with Leah. This GIF is cracking me up. Before this, is that we created like 10 different versions of this presentation because we just weren't sure how to best present everything that we've learned in the past 8-ish years, and so we came up with our top 11 tips to make remote working a reality. I feel like David Letterman, top 10 lists.
Listicles,
Listicles, hey. So the first one I think is a big one, and it's an important one, is really to reflect on your dreams. And I think one of the, sorry, I'm just navigating this a little bit here. One of the things that we always reflected on, especially coming back from this trip, was, you know, what are our dreams? And, you know, coming and being like children of immigrants, you know, we had this expectation of like what it means to live the American dream. And so I guess I pulled up the chat because I'm like, anyone who is a child of immigrants or, you know, someone who's immigrated here yourself, like just throw it in the chat. I don't know, a smiley face or a yes. And because you could relate, right? Because, you know, our parents really.
Why you no doctor?
Our parents really fought to come here, and kind of there's this list of things that were expectations, and rightfully so. You know, you earn a college degree, make this big 6-figure salary, buy a house, get married, you know, make our parents proud, have kids, like all the things. And then we realized like travel is at the very end, like after you do all these things, which was like decades in our future. And we were like, I don't know about that. So we like, you know, went through a lot of these motions. You know, we checked off like a lot of things on this list, right? And then all of a sudden we were like, okay, wait. There has to be something more. Like, you know, there has to be something that we can do to really create our own dream. And so that's how we created our own dream life, our own version of the American dream. You know, doing work that we're really passionate about, designing our own schedule, really connecting with people, you know, connecting with people like over country counting, versus, so like, no offense to all of our country counters out there, I know you're there. And then really create opportunities for ourselves to have like new experiences that we really would not have had otherwise.
Yeah. So that's then led to us basically trying to find ways to create more time. So I remember coming across this corny but very inspirational YouTube video because I tend to reference this thing so frequently. But throughout the 3 stages, if you want to break it down that way, of our life, youth, adulthood, and retirement, we have any 2 of the 3 in the center: health, time, and wealth. And when you're young, you might have a lot of time and good health, but you're poor. And when you're in retirement, you have a lot of time and you have a lot of money because you've been saving all this time, but your health is quickly deteriorating. So adulthood became, where we are right now is the only place where we can sort of adjust these parameters so that we can find ways to have all 3. We have our health relatively, holla if you have gout, put it in the chat. Wealth, questionable depending on how you use it and how you mind your money. But time is a huge one. So, I mean, how many times do you hang out with friends and it's just like very tough to find a time for you guys to meet up because they're just so busy. So that is kind of what we were focusing on. And so when we were living our life in New York, we basically tried to focus on strategizing ways, exit strategies, I guess. So during that time, we were living very great, lucrative, or we had careers in lucrative jobs that were perfect for what we went to school for. And on paper, most people would argue that, hey, you made it, it's a success, like it's great. But in terms of our new dreams that Carmela had just mentioned and so on and so forth, creating time was important for us because we wanted to inject some of our own passions into this and not just live out this monotonous cog life.
And travel.
Yeah, and travel. So that leads us to knowing your worth and applying what you've learned. So I was in an advertising agency for 10 years. I was doing photo retouching at a pre-press photo retouching shop. And that combined with the idea of what a fine artist typically is with gallery work, solo shows or group shows, and lugging around all this, like all these art supplies and canvases and easels, they both don't seem to lend themselves to a life of working remotely and being location independent. But I think the important takeaway here is because I was actually in an office job for 10 years and learning a lot of computer skills along the way, it opened up my possibilities by then transitioning into things like digital work. And the digital work ended up coming back full circle because, as you can see in the bottom right, I successfully, big shout out to Lauren in the chat, but co-work was my first sort of breakout mural as a fine artist. So I managed to find a way to loop everything back into and of itself and not necessarily shying away from everything that had come before or regretting anything that had come before, but sort of using that to inform what happens next.
And so our next tip is to really just start your remote work life is to attend meetups and network. And here I want to dive into my story a little bit. So like Raymond, like I had a career that in a kind of more extreme way wasn't one where remote work was a natural progression. So I used to work in nonprofits. I worked for New York City Department of Education, like office jobs where you're like meeting with people and doing all the things like in person. And in trying to figure out how could we travel more, how could we live remotely, I really had to forge my own path, because a lot of, if you look at any kind of remote work, digital nomad job list online, like there's nothing for people who have a career in the kind of social, public sector. And so for me, I really had to figure out, well, how do I make my own path? And so a lot of this was driven by the fact that I attended meetups and I was networking a lot. So this picture I love. This is from a Nomadic Matt meetup in 2005. We are so young, not 2005, 2015, but like this is Raymond, Erica, who is the head of the Nomadic Network, is next to Raymond. Matt's in the middle. Jay, our friend, who's also in here in this group as well, I think he's there too. But like we have Fireball whiskey shots, and this was 5 years ago. So at this point, I wasn't going to this meetup with the intention of like, oh, this is a pivotal stepping stone. This was like me knowing Matt just started his nonprofit, me wanting to meet more people, and really just like going to a place to put me in an environment where I would just meet new people and open myself up to opportunities. And so that has inevitably led me to a lot of like really great trajectories in my career. So I quit my job in 2015 and honestly didn't work for a year because I was trying to figure it out. I did a lot of volunteer work. I actually volunteered for FLYTE for a couple of years as a board member, and just doing a lot of soul searching. I picked up a transitionary job as an online math tutor because I love numbers. And so really I was just trying to figure out like, what are those stepping stones? And then eventually by attending another meetup, I got my first nonprofit consulting gig. I was doing grant writing and evaluation for a nonprofit in Chiang Mai, Thailand called Urban Light. And they advocate and provide services for boys that are victims of sex trafficking. And so that work just gave me so much meaning and made me realize that I can live and work remotely as a nonprofit professional. And then eventually in 2018, I became FLYTE's executive director. And for those of you who don't know, FLYTE is Nomadic Matt's nonprofit, and we empower youth through travel and give youth the opportunity to travel who wouldn't have otherwise. And it really is my dream job because it marries my love for education with my love for travel. And the picture here is me with the group that we sent abroad last year. This is a group from Oakland, California, and we sent them to Colombia. And so it really is, you know, I'm literally living my dream and I feel very grateful for that. And that's all really because I showed up at these meetups and put myself out there.
Yeah. So, address your fears. This is kind of an interesting one because, you know, as you even just talk about embarking on huge trips like this, like when we first started, I feel like there are a lot of imposed fears that people tend to express on their behalf, and they're totally valid. But I think what's important here is to go through the exercise of actually playing out the worst case scenario. What would happen if I did go on this trip and I was to spend all my money too quickly, or I was to, you know, just have to retreat and go back home with my tail between my legs. And really, what you find is if you do play out the scenario and you actually pay attention to what that actually looks like, it may involve a lot of embarrassment, or maybe it'll be inconvenient to sort of pick up where you left off, go back to an old job that you had, or whatever have you. Maybe you even have to live with your parents for a little bit. Hi, mom and dad. But ultimately, it's not impossible to bounce back. And it comes at the risk of potentially reaching such highs like these 3 photos represent. So your fears, while valid, shouldn't really control your decisions. And it's great to be mindful of them, but we would not have met these people on our travels, and we would not have had these connections on these travels. And that is priceless. And that is totally worth any kind of fear that somebody may try and instill before your little adventure, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And to be all meta about it, like honestly, like if we didn't take that risk of traveling abroad or working remotely, like we probably would not be sitting, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. You know, our lives would look very different. So it's one of those things where what's the worst that could happen? And then you answer that and you're like, all right, let's try it, see what works.
Right.
Oh, you know, Ben's cookies, Ava, so good.
So bomb.
So our next tip on how to make this lifestyle work is to save, budget, and travel hack. And so, you know, there are tons of information out there about how to make this work financially. And so these are ones that really resonated and have been effective for us. And so the first is the good old Charles Schwab banking account. It allows you to have no fee ATMs all over the world, which is crazy because if you take money out of an ATM in Bangkok, you're charged the ATM fee plus the charge that your bank would have charged you. So it's like, you know, plus $5-6 for every transaction. And this is completely free and no charge for Charles Schwab, which is awesome. And another thing that we love and use is Trail Wallet, which is a budget tracking app, which there are tons out there, but Trail Wallet I know is touted by a lot of the people in the traveler community. It's a great interface. You can just automatically keep track of like where you're spending your money. And then the next two, automate your savings. This is just as simple as setting something up to like move some money from your personal checking account to a savings account so that your savings will like earn interest over time, so that when you do take that leap, you'll have a financial safety net and just money to fall back on, or money to kind of like, you know, buffer you for the first couple months where you don't really have work yet. And then similarly, it's kind of just eliminating any unnecessary expenses, especially those subscriptions. Although we do still have Netflix, but you know, all those other things, like, you know, like you could just steal someone else's, you know, Spotify password, maybe, I don't know.
Right.
But a lot of these suggestions came from a book called Ramit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich, which actually came out in 2009. And he just released the 10-year version last year. And it's a timeless book. It really just shares a lot of just practical, no nonsense tips about like how to just save money. And I think that is really, it was really essential for us to have that book and to use it, essential. And then the lastly is travel hacking. I think, you know, a lot of people on this call might be well versed in how to use points and miles to your favor. So we do that too. We haven't paid for a long haul flight in, I can't even remember the last long haul flight I bought out of pocket, but the Points Guy, Million Mile Secrets, and Prince of Travel are some of my favorites. And of course, Matt has a lot of resources on his website as well.
Preach. All right. Well, stay in affordable countries. So I think over time we've started to figure out what countries allowed us, with the strength of the dollar, to extend our stay longer and longer. And of course, staying in countries longer allows you to benefit from things like monthly rates for accommodations as opposed to nightly. So here's a list of some of our favorite cities in ascending order, from very affordable to highly not affordable. And I think every so often what Carmela and I try and do is sort of course correct and sort of check to make sure like what any given year might look like. We may have in our budget and planning the ability to stay in Hawaii for 1 month and maybe then counterbalance it by staying in Thailand or India for a few months. In this isolated, very isolated situation, no pun intended, we are quote unquote stuck in Hawaii, and we've managed to find ways to make ends meet despite these unforeseen occurrences. And so I think it's important to sort of have a tally of what cities work for you, what satisfies the check boxes that you absolutely require in any given country or destination that you'd like to set up shop. And oftentimes it's not necessarily the place that, I know a lot of people tend to ask us, what's your favorite place in the world? And it's like, well, that approach is totally different because we need it to be sort of all encompassing. You know, we need nightlife, we need routine, we need all these certain things that we're going to get to in the rest of this presentation. But yeah, so a lot of it sort of depends on what you yourself are looking for and how to achieve that.
Yeah, and so in all these cities, and we just listed a bunch of our favorites. And what's interesting is that some of our favorites might not be someone else's favorites, and like conversely, people may love a city and we may hate it. So really, I feel like just don't knock a place till you try it. But once you do find a place that you do like, you know, being location independent people who work, it puts us in an interesting scenario because it's not like we're staying for a week, but it's not like we need a 1-year lease. And so finding accommodations, you know, you have to get a little creative with it. So Airbnb obviously is like the first place that most people go. Oftentimes I negotiate via the Airbnb messenger with the host and say, you know, we work remotely, we're like great people, we love Airbnb, we've been on it for a long time, you know, we're staying for a month, can you give us a discount? And so oftentimes, you know, that kind of drives down the cost a little bit to have that conversation with the host before booking a place. And that being said, I know Airbnb prices out a lot of locals. And so if it could be avoided, we try to do it, but sometimes it's hard to find accommodations otherwise. But other ways we go about it are searching like any city and then plus the word expat or nomad. on Facebook, and there's always tons of groups of, you know, Chiang Mai or Kuala Lumpur, like any of those cities where there's a lot of people who live and work remotely. There's a Facebook group, and they share either different strategies for finding a place or if they have a spare room. So that's always been pretty helpful as well. One approach that I think requires a little bit more trust and a little bit kind of, you know, going with the flow attitude is to book your first few days in a hotel or hostel, and then once you get to a place, just like get out there and go on the ground and, you know, visit apartment buildings, talk to people in coffee shops and be like, where do you live? And like, you know, not in a creepy way, of course, but like, you know, do you know any leads of like where to find apartments? And then if you want to kind of continue the like online searching. That's funny. I'm reading Leah's thing. Searching online and networking groups. So the Nomadic Network's really helpful, couch surfing. And then I know Wonderful Women has a network just for women who want to support each other through accommodations. And just because Leah said something, so this picture, I'm in an airport lounge eating cake, and I feel like it's 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm working. So this is the epitome of what it means to live and work remotely, like the non-glamorous side.
Build a routine that works for you. So I think this is a lot. This has a lot to do with slowing down your travel. So you can find yourself sort of exploring indefinitely and not leaving any time to work. And sometimes you get so wrapped up in work mode that you forget to see the scenery that you're blessed to even be in the presence of. So I think for us, and we talk about this a lot with a lot of our friends and family as well, but creating a routine that works for you, exercise, meditation, and journaling is huge for us. Finding optimal times to work. Time zones are really tough, especially for Carmela when she's doing conference calls on Zoom, and people are on all different parts of this globe. And also using productivity tools. Carmela uses these, I don't necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are like, again, what works for you. I know some people use Pomodoro. I don't, because I can't follow. It just doesn't work for me. But one of the things I love to do is make my to-do list a get-to-do list. Like that little word just makes everything seem a little bit more exciting and privileged to do the thing we have to do, which sometimes is taxes and it's not fun. But anyway, establishing a routine is like really important to like maintain sanity and get work done.
Absolutely.
Number 9. The number 9, building your community. So I think this is important because the remote work world can get really lonely, especially traveling. And honestly, traveling as a couple, I think when people see the two of us, we're less approachable because people feel like, oh, they're a couple, they like want time for themselves. But like really, like we love spending time with each other, but we like really love other people too. And so really building a community as you're living and working abroad is like, I think something you have to actively try to do. And so what we've done, and these are again, things that have worked for us, is that oftentimes we go to a new city and then you look up traveler meetups, either on Facebook or meetup.com. Mundo Lingo is this language exchange meetup that happens all over the world. The first one we went to was in Chiang Mai, but they happen all over the world. Really leveraging and like just making friends of friends of friends. Mm-hmm. I am famous or infamous for like sliding into people's DMs, but like not in a creepy way, just because I follow a bunch of people, you know, who travel, and if they're in a place, I'm in a place, I'm like, hey, you want to hang out? And really that's yielded like so many great friendships, like all over the world. And then also like talking to strangers. That's like something that my mom always tells me not to do. Even though I'm 35 years old, she still tells me not to talk to strangers. But like that's how you can like make friends and building community.
I made a huge community of Pokemon trainers around the world, and I'm not ashamed of it because that's led to some really interesting interaction. We found drum circles in South America. We found really cool people from all walks of life here in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And yeah. It's kind of amazing what happens just from some simple game, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I got roped into a lot of that Pokemon stuff, but you know what? We have made a lot of friends from it. And I just wanted to like note this picture is like so interesting. So Jackie is on this chat or in this call right now, and her husband did a crazy, amazing, like around the world, like 2-year trip. And she is like a friend of Raymond's cousin, and who is now our friend. And so we met her in Thailand, but then next to Raymond is a woman named Ari who has a blog, and she teaches abroad. And so I actually reached out to her on Instagram to meet up because I saw that we were in the same city. And then on the far right is a woman named Elaine, who I literally met in a cookie or a bakery.
In a cookie.
We met in a bakery because I was really enthusiastic about these cookies, and she was just like, what is the big deal? And I was like, these are the best cookies. And then we just had a whole conversation, and all of us ended up having dinner one night, and it was so much fun. And so
it was really, the same day we met Elaine, so
yeah.
It was like a farmer in the Dell
mentality. All of these like meetups are just like so interesting to like, all of these methods are a great way to like find people to just be friends with, and you're friends for life, really, the people you meet while traveling.
Yeah.
And so, we've just talked about like a lot of the fun stuff, a lot of the things that made us laugh, but, I think it's important to understand the challenges that are involved with this kind of lifestyle. And so, the first one, which is like reflected in these pictures, are that we miss loved ones. We miss our loved ones. We have huge families that we miss a lot of holidays, a lot of birthdays, a lot of life events, a lot of babies being born that we're not there for, and we always show up in like, a device that's passed around during Thanksgiving or Christmas. So we miss them a lot, and that's definitely a challenge. And sometimes we can be unrelatable to people back home. Like they just don't understand what we do or why we do it, which I think is why communities like the Nomadic Network are really so important. And then I also feel like there is this fear that, I'm talking about my awesome multi-day trek in Myanmar, and someone's looking at me like, what is she saying and why is she showing off? So like, being able to, not being able to relate to people back home, or they think that you're on vacation for like years on end when you're really just working, but just in different places. So, which we are. But really also like making sure that, like, I know we mentioned this as part of the American dream, like making sure our parents' sacrifices were worth it. And then there also is that level of like the constant moving and uncertainty that happens when traveling. Because, like COVID is a great example of like just uncertainty being present in all our lives right now. But yeah, just the constantly moving could be a really big challenge. And so for our last tip, we're bringing it full circle. Wah, wah.
Yay!
And our last tip is that remember there are no wrong turns. And so what that means really for us is that there is an adventure around every corner. Every person has their own path that they're going to take as part of this journey. And for us, we take this as literally as when we go out, this phrase came about and became our blog in 2012 because one weekend we didn't have any plans. And so we were like, okay, let's drive at an intersection, make a right or a left, and then we'll just see where we end up. And then that day we ended up like eating langoustine for the first time, finding cool bookshelves and like, that we bought for our house that we had at the time. But then, we realized that we were only a few miles from home, but it was a world that we would not have had found otherwise. And so we literally take that advice as we're exploring a new place, but then we also take it philosophically, really reflecting at every phase in our lives and like really understanding like, what's the lesson? How could we use that to apply to our next phase, and really listening to what's calling us.
Yeah. It's not about not making mistakes, but it's about making smart mistakes and enjoying that process.
Yeah.
So, we encourage all of you to try practicing some of that locally or internationally the same way we do, and report back. We love hearing stories about that. I know sometimes people who have bought into some of our merch too, it's like, it's really cool because it reminds them to sort of slow down and explore. And, you think you know a place and you really don't. And you always can learn more. So, that's a huge one.
And then, this is one of our last slides, but there's this phrase that I know gets passed around in the travel circles, that your mileage may vary. And I think it's important to share that, this was our journey. These are how we applied what we've learned to our lives, which is a very unique path to everybody else's. And so here are just a handful of people who have really just had different experiences with regards to travel and working remotely. So just on the far left, Paul is one of the members of FLYTE's board of directors, but he also works remotely, and he started working remotely because he joined the remote year program, which tries to kind of give you a jump start to that lifestyle. Danielle, who some of you might recognize as Nomadic Matt's winner of the trip around the world. She presented about a month ago. She's right now, she did her trip around the world and now is in Berlin for a couple of years doing grad school. And then in the middle is one of my cousins and her coworkers who are really badass labor and delivery nurses who love their job and wouldn't, while there is an option for, traveling nurses, like they love what they do where they do it and they travel for fun. And then in the far right, Anna is someone who, again, we met online through Instagram, who is a blogger, remote worker. She does copywriting remotely. And she spends a lot of time in Kuala Lumpur, and we met her there. And she's a great friend that we've met, who, again, lives this lifestyle similar to us. But then Kat, we met in Hawaii at a yoga retreat and, ended up keeping in touch. And she met us in Malaysia, but then she's from Oregon and loves her job as a registered dietitian. So really it's this notion that just taking, everyone has a different a different path to take, and just really honoring that and understanding what works for you and what doesn't, and just learning at each phase of it.
Yeah.
And so with that,
if you like this video, make sure to subscribe. But if you do want to stay connected.
Yeah, we're on Instagram, we're on email. You can find us on the Nomadic Network. We're just happy. This is a crazy journey. This is I think it was so hard to come up with this, what to share, because there's just so many nuances. And this was kind of a path that we forged in our own unique way. And so I feel like you'll all do the same if this is something that you even want to do. And so we're happy to support you in any way that makes sense. So happy to take any questions or,
Awesome. How do we turn that off?
Click to exit. So grateful to you for
this. Yeah,
stop share. Being here.
All right.
Ooh, there's questions. There's lots of questions. Here, let me see what
Amazing. Thank you so much, you guys. No Wrong Turns crew. You guys are awesome.
Hi, Trey.
Hello, hello.
I can't do two things at once. I'm reading the chat now. Okay, so.
That's okay. I took note of all of the questions. And
okay,
I can just read them
I'll
out.
let you take the leads because it will take me forever to figure out what to answer.
Yeah, no worries. I always drop my questions in as well. Just, oops, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, wow. Trang has a lot of great questions. Linda has one. The questions are coming in. I actually would love to know more about I wanted to know more about how you guys prepped financially.
That's a great question.
Excellent question.
Well, a lot of it did come
to go long term. What did you give up? What did you sacrifice? What did you move around?
I think back then a lot of it was trying to save as much as possible. So like Carmela mentioned, I Will Teach You to Be Rich was a huge part of how we structured our finances. And basically we're very transparent with each other on how we want to save and how we want to spend our money on experiences, not things. I had a lot more to learn than Carmela because she's not that kind of person, but I was all wrapped up in a lot of gadgets and cameras. Shopping. Yeah. So I think back then it was just trying to focus on saving as much as possible. So even if I would get a raise, I wouldn't spend like I got a raise. Mm-hmm. And even if I got multiple raises, I wouldn't spend like that happened. We would both continue to live the life that we had before, and everything would just get bucketed into saving for future events or occasions. So that's probably the main.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, just to reiterate the whole automate the savings, because I feel like it's one of those things where you can't forget it. It's like the money never existed in the first place. Right. And then also just finding a place that has a good interest rate for your savings. So right now, this is just in the weeds, but Capital One's money market account has one of the higher interest rates. So
back then it used to be ING with 3%, which was great because your money's just sort of sitting there collecting interest. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But now you're lucky to get 1% or fractions of a percent. So
yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I had muted myself. Trang had some great tips, and so did Doug. You know, sell everything you don't need, get roommates, cut back on eating out. That's a huge one you could do pretty easily. Stop going to shop to go to.
Uh-oh.
Prepare food at home, right? Okay, that's, can you guys hear me okay? Cutting out.
Yeah, it's okay now.
So let's see. Linda wants to know how you handled health insurance while traveling.
Ooh, that's a question we get a lot. So health insurance is like kind of tricky, but kind of not. So there's a lot of great guides and resources that, you know, some of like the bloggers put out there. So we, our insurance that we use is called, whoa, I just completely blanked. Oh, IMG. And so it's like something global. Anyway, it's IMG insurance, but it's one where it covers us for everything when we're abroad, and then for when we're back in the States, it covers us for anything like catastrophic. And so we can't go to the doctor to like get a wellness checkup, but you know, if God forbid we get like into an accident, like that kind of stuff is covered. And so we do that because usually, this is kind of like an odd year, but usually we're not in the United States most of the time. Mm-hmm. And to be quite honest, like healthcare abroad is it's so affordable and it's so amazing. So I think just to kind of cite some examples, like I tend to get sick a lot. So I got really bad pneumonia in Bangkok, which required me having to go to the hospital like 3 or 4 times, chest x-rays, all the things like antibiotics, blood work. And I feel like my bill was only like $60 to $80 US for the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And so really just, you know, we're really privileged to be able to like leverage those systems. So like, you know, going to countries that have really affordable healthcare and really high quality healthcare. I think with some of the hospitals we go to in Thailand are like hotels, like they're so nice.
We make it a point to actually get our teeth cleaned whenever we're back there in Thailand because it's just really well done and super affordable. Mm-hmm. I even got some major dental work out there. I've had really bad luck with dental work in the States. I've had like root canals and crowns and all this stuff put in, and apparently from what I've learned in Thailand is they're not necessarily doing it so well out here in the States, or at least maybe I'm not finding the right doctors. And so I, for example, was able to get 2 crowns in for the price of 1 or less than the price of 1 that it would have cost in the States. And this is all out of pocket. So yeah, in some ways it's a lot more beneficial and money does go a lot longer. In situations like that.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, I think this is not necessarily the reason I do it, but it's also an interesting cultural experience to like go to the hospital or the doctor or the dentist abroad, because it's different, you know, and so it's interesting to see like those differences and to learn from them and be a little bit uncomfortable. Oh, Jackie said your teeth look good. But yeah, that's, and then also a side note, we also have property insurance that we get through Clements, just so our laptops and other valuables are covered in case they get lost or damaged or stolen. That's another thing that we have
also. That's really, absolutely, really important. David, I don't know if you've already answered it. Do you maintain a permanent residence or address in the U.S. or anywhere else?
That's a good question. So we have a address. So our kind of legal address is my parents' house back in New Jersey, and that's also where we keep like our couch from our apartment. So that's kind of our legal like residence. Although we don't physically have a house that we like go back to. That's our own whenever we're back in the States. So we just have like that as like our kind of legal place where all our mail gets sent. If we do have mail, we try to make everything electronic. Yeah. Oh no, Leah, I can't hear you. Ew.
That makes sense. Oh, hey. I'm so sorry.
You're back.
It's so bad.
Okay, you're back.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
All the roommates are home and they're all using the Wi-Fi. So I think it's like, bad right now.
No worries.
Someone had a question about internet. Who asked that question about internet and Wi-Fi? Like, do you guys, okay, I'll find it, but.
I think I saw it. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I can't remember who asked it.
It was.
Let's see, health insurance, travel. Well, let's start with Emma's question. How long do you spend in each country, like outside of COVID-19? Like, how long were you spending in each country?
I think it depends on a couple things. So what really guides where we end up are twofold. So one, we kind of center our lives around like events that are happening. So some of them are just very practical. We have some like really close friends back home that if there's a wedding, like we'll go to the wedding, and then like kind of plan everything around that. And then there's also TravelCon, shameless plug for Nomadic Matt's travel media conference. And that's something that we go to every year. And so we kind of have like our time in the US reserved for that. And then otherwise
it's people.
It's
people. Community.
Yeah.
So like oftentimes we'll get wind of family members or friends that are looking to take a trip somewhere. And we'll try and organize a way to link up elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And that often ends up working pretty well. I know we've both met both of our parents fairly frequently in the past few years. Mm-hmm. And that's been amazing because we, like we said, miss a lot of the events back home. And another thing we like to do is sort of, if we're testing a new city, we'll go with the intent of sort of exploring for 1 to 2 weeks, depending on where it is, obviously. And if we like it, then consider options for extending for a month or 2 or 3 month long stays afterward. But it sort of is like a trial run to see if it actually is livable, again, based off of the check boxes that we need in any given city. Yeah.
And I think just kind of like the short answer is if we like a place and we go back often, it's probably like 2 months is ideal. I mean, maybe longer if we have the time. But I think there's also like visas that could be an issue. Usually we're on a tourist visa wherever we are. So sometimes that's tricky. You have to kind of play that game a bit.
Right. Okay. Sorry, guys. My internet is so crappy right now. It's driving me insane. Can you hear me okay? I wanted to move on to the next question.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure.
Yep. So CK was the one who actually asked about the internet. How do you handle internet connection? Because steady internet would be, their job's biggest concern if they traveled and worked remotely.
Mm-hmm.
Internet. So that's a good one. So I think in terms of like when we're at a place, we always try to make sure that our apartments or whatever that we're renting or staying at for the short term, that they have reliable internet, whether that's, if it's an Airbnb, like checking out like reviews beforehand if people have mentioned pros or cons for the internet. Like same thing if it's a hotel or hostel, like seeing what the reviews say about internet connectivity. But I think the safe backup is really, and this is a lot of learned through trial and error, is like we always get a SIM card wherever we go when we get to the airport, or like however is the best way to obtain it. And I mean, some places like Thailand, you get like,
you can get a month of internet for like $5.
Yeah, and it's like unlimited 5G. 5G is a thing now. Like it's like the fast internet on your phone, and then you could tether. So it's just finding like a good cell phone plan.
Yeah,
we
run through SIM cards like nobody's business.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, our numbers keep changing, but I think one of total sidebar tip here, but like when we first started traveling, what we did was we moved over our old school original cell phone numbers to a Google number. And so that way, anybody who has our old number can still reach us through Google Voice, but we can't necessarily talk over the phone unless we add credit to it, but we can get all those messages. And I think that only costs like $1 to port over. Or was it free?
It was like some small amount. But yeah, it's also good so you have a US number if you need to like to do a 2-factor authentication on a bank account. Like it's just a good thing to have, and that like stays with you regardless of like what SIM card you have.
Sure. Wonder if we should just start tackling some of these questions on our own.
Let's do, well, there was a luggage question. How much luggage do you travel with and what do you pack? This has been like a journey, but we are team carry-on only. And so unless we're flying a budget airline and then it's like everything has to be checked in. But we travel with typically like a 45 liter backpack.
Yeah, I'd say 40 liter. Honestly, the thing that makes travel the hardest, or at least in terms of packing, is the electronics. Because I have a laptop and a tablet for photo retouching, but then I also have a tablet for my digital art. And then it just keeps adding on. Like I have hard drives in order to back up all the photos that I take with the camera that I bring with us and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so I think what we're sort of exploring for future travel is our ways to minimize the amount of electronics we actually carry with us, and potentially maybe even storing our treasured photos on the cloud and things like that. Just really trying to find ways to minimize our load, because that adds up. And it makes things, I mean, like sometimes you're hiking and you don't want to be carrying a roller dolly like luggage up like rubble.
Although I must say, I think there have been instances like this time around where if we know that we're not going to be like in areas where there's going to be a lot of cobblestone streets and like there's actually going to be sidewalks. Like I have become team roller because my shoulders started hurting. Sure. So yeah, I mean, that's something, but still like very much carry on only. Yeah.
So a 40 liter and then usually like a small bag as a personal item in addition to that. That's usually what we travel with.
I like Brian Lynn's question. Coming from another Filipino, how long was it until your parents weren't disappointed with your decision to leave? This is a very interesting question. So I think it's funny, and I'll say my answer. Maybe you have a different one, but I know when we left on our like big round the world honeymoon in 2012, like I think everyone was like, "What are they doing?" Because I ended up quitting my job then too, and so they're like, "What are they doing?" And then they're like, "Okay, maybe they're just like getting it out of their system." And then I think that trip made them like kind of get used to us being abroad and traveling. And then in 2015, when we really, really, really went remote, I don't think they were that surprised. And although I do think every so often they're like, well, when are you coming back? And then over time, they're like, all right, they're not coming back. And I think for both of our parents, they've actually liked the fact that they could meet us places. Both our parents are retired now. And so we could meet them places and like, show them around and like, travel with them, which is something that I don't think we would have done if we had like a normal, like traditional job and didn't have as much like vacation to take.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. I think once they realized that we were responsible people, and we're not taking, unnecessary risks that are going to put our lives in danger, and we're just really trying to find ourselves and be happy, and that we were able to meet up with them remotely or internationally. I think that was the true icing on the cake, and that sort of sealed the deal on we know what we're doing, or that we're not,
Yeah, I think
we're all grown up now.
They trust us, and I think I like to believe we're making them proud.
Yeah.
So another question from Catalina. I like these logistical questions. Like, how do you file taxes in the U.S., TurboTax? So I hate taxes. It's so much work. So we actually have an accountant who really works heavily with like freelancers. So he kind of gets like our very non-traditional tax returns. And so he's great.
He was recommended by a friend of ours also from Jersey.
Yeah, it's another freelancer who just like, so, I mean, we've been using the same guy for the past maybe like 4 years or so. So, I mean, I think it's really important. I mean, I don't think I personally would want to do taxes on my own, but if finding an accountant who like kind of gets like what we do, and
it can get really complicated, like, especially if you're doing freelance work. It's like, I have clients in New York and then I have clients in California, but my mailing address is in New Jersey, and we were doing the work when we were in Asia. So it's like, how do you know how to file that stuff gets really difficult when you're trying to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And It's not impossible if you have the patience and tolerance for it. But
I don't.
you don't.
And then I also have to do FLYTE taxes, which is also another thing. So I also have an accountant who does that too. Holler at all the accountants in the audience. So question from Carol, I like this one for you. Can we hear more about how you make money as an artist? Are you doing design and illustration or selling images on product?
This is a great question because quite honestly, I'm exploring this myself at the moment. So like I said, I was in an advertising agency for 10 years and I was transitioning into finding ways for my art to be released into the world and the wild in however capacity they wanted to. And I think mural art sort of found its way to me. You know, like I was very interested in graffiti. I never did graffiti. It was just something I always liked. And I found out about a mural festival in Hawaii called Powwow Hawaii, where they invite international artists to fly in and for a week just completely redecorate that whole downtown part of Honolulu. And it's amazing. You know, you have firsthand interaction with artists. I actually was invited to one of my favorite artists' studios back in Queens. He gave me an open invite to come check out his studio. So that led to connections that I never would have made. And of course, the mural opportunity that I ended up getting as well. So through friends of friends of friends, it's just like I got wind of a contest for a co-working space subscription, and I, on a whim, decided to just give it a chance, and that ended up leading to meeting some of our best friends over here in Hawaii, and one of my most memorable pieces of art that sadly does not exist anymore, but still was a very memorable sort of manifestation of where my art was at the time. So now I'm toying with the idea of potentially making coloring books is one thing that I'm curious about. Making prints, I follow a few artists that essentially it's almost like they're printing money because they're already known. And so when they come out with limited release prints, they not only are affordable for their fan following, but they can release them regularly and sell out every release. So that's a great way, I would say. I think I follow another artist who has a Patreon where she'll send custom greeting cards from around the world whenever she travels. And so depending on how much you subscribe to their Patreon, you'll get more rewards. And I think maybe the highest reward is the ability to actually visit their home in Japan and use their place as a studio. I don't quite remember the details of it, but it's something that I'm constantly thinking of, and I'm open to ideas as I work through it as well.
Yeah, like everything, again, like I think it just lends itself to like our like mentality of like just figuring something out and like learning from it and then doing it better the next time. There's so many questions. I want to answer all of them. So Trang, you have so many questions and I love it. We met Trang at TravelCon in 2018 in Austin, and then we saw her again in LA. It's like some of my favorite things are meeting travelers again from the, different from the place you met them. Anyway, side note, one of her questions was, when you started first consulting, how did they find you, and did you charge them on an invoice based on what was fair, charge per hour or per project? So I love it. So I had no idea how to be a consultant when I first started. And I think some of it was just figuring it out as I go along. So what I did is that, through networking, I was able to find my first client. I went to a meetup in Chiang Mai, and there was a woman there named Phyllis, who unfortunately recently passed away. And she was like, you do nonprofit work, you write grants. Like, my friend has a nonprofit. And so she introduced me to her friend who founded and runs the nonprofit in Chiang Mai. And so it was just kismet because she had a need for the skills that I had. And it was like really very, very, very serendipitous. And so I started working for her. And in terms of like how I charge, and I think, I don't know if you told me this at first, but it's like charge the client and not the project. And so with other clients, I've, again, through meeting people who like on travels or who have like a lot of my clients have been through people. Like one of them was a friend on Facebook was looking for a data analyst. And so I just was like, Raymond was like, hey, if you could be remote, could be a Carmela. So, I would charge a client of a nonprofit client in Thailand, pretty much half of what I would charge a political consulting firm in DC, which is like another one of my clients. So it's really just depending on who the client is, but then also I think it's like the timeline. So sometimes like my DC client is like, I need this thing in 48 hours. And I'm like, well, I'm charging you a rush rate, and that's like triple what I usually charge. So, you know, really just figuring out like where your range is and where you're comfortable.
It's also the demand, right? Like, or the timelines, because I have some clients in California and New York where you might go through with the retouching gig, I might go through 10, 20 rounds. And whereas if I'm doing retouching for somebody in Hawaii, it would be more laid back. You know, they might trust my retouching right off the bat, and I only have to do 1 or 2 rounds. So I can price it more fairly in that respect. And for the more expensive clients, you end up delivering much more as well. So it's a give and take, and it's a sliding scale. It's no hard, fast rule.
Yeah, that's true. It's like there's no like one right number. And I think that's the challenge, because you want to have like, you don't want to price too high or too low, but it's just, again, like a thing we've like figured out along the way. So, all right, there's maybe like one more question. I like this one from David. Do you travel to any cold weather locations? No.
We do. We try not to, but we do. We will.
I think we are from the Northeast and have survived like so many blizzards and like all of that stuff. And so I think when possible, we like chasing the sun. But I think the times that we do go to places where it's cold is when we meet people. So for example, we did the W trek in Patagonia, and it was like sideways hailing like half the time. We went to Japan last December when it was like winter, which was actually pretty nice, but still like where we could avoid it, we don't like the cold. I really don't like it.
Yeah, we don't want to pack. I mean, this kind of it blends right into how we pack, right? We don't want to pack multiple ski pants and, you know, parkas. We want to pack shorts and t-shirts and tank tops, you know?
Exactly. Maybe Leah, do you want to pick the last question? I can't pick.
Yeah, sorry, I've switched networks. Hopefully I'll stay on. Actually, it was Doug that had a great question, because no one ever asks me this. I like tell people, with all of your traveling to and living in other countries, what have you learned about the USA and Americans? And I feel like I've learned so much more being outside of the country than living here.
Yeah.
I have my answer. We'll see. Okay, let's see. I think the one thing that I learned, and this is the first thing that comes to mind, is that as like Americans, I think we're very career occupation focused. So like the first question I get when I meet someone in the US is, what do you do? As if like your job defines you. Whereas everywhere else, I feel like it's a little different. Like it's more about like what you do is who you are as a person. And I think for me that was helpful, because really, like, I think I was defined by my career the majority of my life. You know, I love what I do now, but I feel like I'm not as defined by it as I was before. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think the only thing I would add is, you know, before it was very driven by how much we made and what our lifestyle was like. And I think even coming back after many years, I remember talking to one of my old high school friends, and I remember asking him just a really simple question. We were catching up, and I asked him, he told me how he was doing website design in Staten Island, which is where I'm originally from. And he was saying that's what his little venture was. And I asked him, are you happy? And it kind of took him aback, because it was like a question that nobody locally really would even ask him, because it's like, what do you mean, am I happy? I have to make money. I have to make money to pay rent and then live this sort of lifestyle that I'm roped into, really. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it for us is sort of recognizing that privilege that we've been given, really. It's like, how can we find ways to make everything intersect? How can we be happy and make money, not necessarily have the money drive us, but how can we make all of it sort of, it's like pushing equalizers on a stereo system. Mm-hmm. It's like, how can we make everything copacetic without, you know, over investing in one particular aspect of your life?
I like that answer.
Right. I love those answers. Thank you both for that. Yeah, I feel like that's a big thing when you leave. Like, people want to know who you are as a person, like you were saying. They want to know what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, or how long you're going to stay wherever you are. Whereas in the US, it's a very cultural thing. It's like, what do you do? Like, your job defines you, when it shouldn't. It's part of you, yeah, but you know, it's not all of you at times. So there was so much great information in this presentation, and I can just see from the comments and the chat box that everyone took a few things away in learning. And so I'm happy that people were learning and people were interested. Your guys' questions were fantastic. Carmela and Raymond, you two are bosses for picking up because my Wi-Fi went out. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. And everyone, appreciate you making the time and the space to be here. I know there's a lot going on in the world. So for you to take an hour out of your day and join us, this is like our favorite part of our day. So before we let you go, just a reminder, you can find all of the Nomadic Matt events at this link here in the bio. Tomorrow, we do have a very special event by two women who are coming on, and they're going to let us know how to be a better ally to Black people while traveling. And you can sign up for that event tomorrow. I believe that's at 5 p.m. West Coast time. Ooh, I'm losing my words right now. I think the no internet got me. I feel like I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing? So we also have an event on Thursday at 9 a.m. as well. So go to that link, go ahead and sign up for whatever you'd like. Tomorrow's a really important event for us, guys. So we'd love it if you could share with your circles. And you can also join the Patreon as well. Nomadic Matt has a Patreon, so you can go on there, explore. Recordings of these events will be available to Patreon members. So that's always something that's really cool as well. I'm gonna drop that link in here. I believe that's it. And yeah, again, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Carmela and Raymond. You guys definitely hit them up on social media if you have more questions. They're the nicest people, so I'm sure they're happy to answer them. And I believe that's it for today. So we'll see you guys again this week.
Aloha.
Aloha. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
I feel like I'm on a parade.